Welcome to AskReddit is Fun. Today, job applicants share why they walked out of their job interview before it was over. They saw the worst of the companies before even being hired and made the right call. I mean, some of these terms are outright malicious, and I wonder how the bosses thought they'd get away with it. But hey, you be the judge. A topic by user Yukichigai. I walked out of an interview only once, and it was because the people organizing it were insane. They had arranged a large-scale interviewing process for the entire city. After getting there early, I realized there was quite a few applicants, so I didn't mind the fact that I had to wait about 3 hours. Eventually, they asked a group of 3 of us into an office, where we waited again for about 45 minutes. Again, I was happy to have an interview, so I waited. Eventually, I met with a manager for the store who asked the standard range of questions, and I thought I did pretty well. At the end of the interview though, I was asked to sign a waiver, and when I asked why, I found out they had recorded the entire interview for the purpose of an episode of Current Affairs, and didn't tell me beforehand. After waiting for so long just to be disrespected like that, I just walked out. I happened to catch the episode later, and it featured some of the people who I had waited with in the room. Thank God I didn't sign that waiver, because the angle of the investigation was that unemployed people didn't put any effort into getting jobs, completely ignoring the fact that everyone had waited for hours just to get a chance. I walked out of an interview before it began once. The interview was scheduled for 10 a.m., which I double-checked from the voicemail that they left. I showed up about 10 minutes early, signed in, all that jazz, and waited, and waited, and waited. 45 minutes later, I got up, asked the receptionist, who looked seriously embarrassed, to let my interview know that I was no longer interested, and left. 2 hours later, I got a rude call asking if I had forgotten the appointment. I laughed and hung up. I went to an interview with my prospective supervisor. I looked around the office, noticed the garbage cans were full, the walls and carpet dirty, and the supervisor's desk was old and had chips out of it. So I mentioned that the company didn't seem to be doing any basic upkeep, and then asked, point blank, "Is this a good company to work for?" She replied, "No," and hung her head. I said thanks and walked out. I accidentally walked out of an interview. I had driven 4 hours to apply for a bar, gaming room job in preparation for moving cities for study. I had purchased an apartment, so I kinda had to take job searching seriously. I had spent about 20 minutes talking to the gaming manager, during which time the venue manager joined us, when some guy came up to them and started chatting to them. I sat there for maybe 5-10 minutes, wondering if the interview was over, when I decided that most questions had been asked and my existence had barely been acknowledged as the guy walked up. I half interrupted, shook one of the interviewer's hands and said thanks, and exited the premise with no idea how the interview went. I was crossing the road to my car when one of the interviewers chased me across the road and offered me the position. Turns out that the guy interrupting the interview was one of the owners of the venue. I sometimes wonder how I got through life considering how socially inept I can be. I'm fairly socially inept myself at times, but even I knew that wasn't your fault. They should have at least said, "Oh, this is so-and-so, the venue owner," to you briefly before getting into a 5 to 10 minute conversation with him. They screwed up, not you, which is probably why they still offered you the job. Them. "We have a very dedicated team. We often stay after normal office hours. Is that okay with you?" Me, sure. I mean, I'm single without kids, so if it's adequately compensated, I'm happy to do as much overtime as necessary. No problem. Them. "Oh, no. We're passionate about the work we do here, so overtime is not paid." Me. "Okay then. Thank you for your time, and goodbye." The job was advertised as a morning shift. The interviewer starts to explain how I would be used as a wild card to fill any shift that was needed, including short notice. I love how a lot of places feel like it's okay to advertise one position as if it's a completely different position and wonder why they can't find anyone to fill it. I was told about 40 minutes into an interview that the job I was interviewing for was going to be an 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. position. This had never been mentioned in the original job posting or in the preliminary call prior to the interview. This wasn't a gas station job or anything either. High-profile law firm who basically needed a graphic designer to put together presentation materials overnight for use the following day. They also said it so that I'd be working hours just barely under the limit to qualify as full-time employee with benefits. Again, none of this was ever mentioned in the job description up to this point. The last straw was that they gave me a 30-minute test to prove I could work on a deadline, based on actual materials I'd be working with, chicken scratch post-it notes, unintelligible audio recordings, and other horrible sources I had to base my designs on. I walked out of that test about 5 minutes in. Yeah, frick people like this. I expect you to do elite work for part-time pay, shifty hours, and no benefits. If you want good people, you generally have to pay them. Just after I had been given 3 months notice of layoff due to the office closure for a job I really liked, I took off early one day for the interview across town. When I arrived, I entered a waiting room full of people at least twice my age, in suits, resumes in hand. Upon seeing this sight, I realized I had very little chance of the position being offered. But since I was there, I might as well try. What I didn't expect is that we were all scheduled to interview together. We were all herded into the conference room where the group interview commenced. After a few rounds of questioning, learning each other's qualifications, how we would handle various situations, and so on, we collectively learned that this position was part-time, not what had been advertised, and a mere $9 an hour. I walked out along with 3 other people. I recently went to an interview for a bank in my area. First, the woman I spoke to on the phone misrepresented herself. She told me she was the assistant branch manager. Upon arrival, she told me she was the head teller. The branch manager would be arriving shortly. I waited for an hour. After an hour of me double-checking the time and wondering if I had gotten there early, I got up to leave. The head teller said she'd be there in 5 minutes, but at that point, I just figured I obviously wasn't important enough. I left. I got a call back 3 days later apologizing and asking if they could set up another meeting at a bank I was nowhere near. I politely declined. I graduated in 2009 with a degree in print journalism, and after a summer of doing random retail stuff, I decided to find a real job. I see a job posting for a marketing specialist with emphasis in graphic design work. I brought my portfolio, and they told me they were impressed, and that I would get to do some design, writing, and editing. They said they represented big-time companies, so 22-year-old me was incredibly excited. They told me to come back the next day for a job shadow, dressed professionally. I showed up bright and early with my nicest business clothes and heels, and they told me I'd be riding with this redheaded girl. Side note, she started where I wound up working a few years later and didn't make it through training. I live in the north side of my city, and we drove all the way south to a residential neighborhood. I wasn't 100% sure what was going on, but they gave me a catalog and said we'd be doing door-to-door sales for Sears Home Improvement. I made it 2 hours in the Midwest humidity, dealing with mad homeowners who didn't want to have their homes improved by Sears. While walking onto a driveway, my foot got caught in a rabbit hole and I felt a snap. I couldn't put any weight on it, and I told the redheaded girl I needed to go. She panicked, saying she needed to meet her quota for the day. I asked if we could take an early lunch, so we went to Arby's, where she and the rest of the sales crew left me with a swollen foot. I had to call my dad to pick me up. He worked an hour and a half away. He dropped me off in my car, and I drove with my injured right foot home. Yeah, that helped. Nope. I went to urgent care and discovered an effulgent fracture on the top of my foot. Yes, it was Matrix Resources. Stupid. Back in high school, I had an interview with Cold Stone Creamery. They made us break into groups where we had to create and sing a catchy tip song. I'm really shy, so I wanted to walk out before the singing commenced, but I really needed a job, so I decided to try and stick it out. I sang the stupid song. After the songs, they interviewed us one-on-one. For one question, they basically asked us what we thought the weakness of our group members were. I told them I didn't know the people well enough to say, and that I really didn't want to get a job by bad-mouthing someone else. As I got up to leave, they asked me if I wanted to hear what some of the group members had said about me. I just kept walking. Should have gone with my guts and left before the singing. I used to work at Cold Stone. People gave out so much free ice cream because we had a lot of money on tips. I also work with some stupidly charismatic people, like one is on TV now. So when they were making, I made a bunch in tips. But yeah, the singing sucked. Luckily, when I interviewed, there was supposed to be one other person, and he didn't show up, so I got the job. It was a security guard job. I was way overqualified, but needed to pay bills. Sat down across from a dead-eyed young woman who worked in HR. She read interview questions from a computer screen in monotone, typing my answers up as we went. Was kind of prissy and snappy. I answered all the questions really well, but sometimes she didn't feel like it filled the exact questions. I'm guessing that she was really unhelpful. Like, she would ask, "Please describe a situation or day where you or your coworkers were given an unexpected assignment, difficulty, or mistake, and had to multitask to balance the new workload with current duties." I went into detail about how that was a daily experience at one of my positions. Nope, didn't cut it with her. She stared blankly and said that didn't answer the question. Then she repeats the long-arse question word for word. Keep in mind, she was reading for the question right from the screen, so I get she was probably following specific instructions. As much a red flag about the company as her. Still, she was so rude about the entire thing. You could tell she really didn't want to be there. After trying to answer one question 3 times, each time her repeating the question like I was retarded, she wouldn't even explain what I was saying wrong. I just apologized, saying I changed my mind about the job and walked out without explanation. Got a much better paralegal job 2 weeks later. It doesn't sound that bad, but you didn't hear the totally unjustified contempt in her voice. So uncalled for. I tried to kill it with kindness. Just didn't work. Wow. Good for these Redditors that they walked away from these jobs, dodged a bullet. Do you have a story about your worst job? Let us know in the comments. I really hope you enjoyed the video as much as I did making it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I upload new videos every day. Until then, check out another video if you like.